Self-learning is crucial in life because it determines who is successful and who is not successful. Today we're going to talk a little bit about why self-learning is important, how to do it, and kind of the ins and outs of self-learning in general. So number one, probably one of the biggest things about self-learning is don't stop learning after you graduate, whether it's your undergraduate degree, whether it's high school, whether it's a university. The thing is, don't stop learning. If you stop learning, it's going to be very, very hard to be able to start again. And I can tell you this because I worked for a while. I self-learned a lot right after university, and then I kind of started slacking, and now I'm pushing myself to get back into it, and it's getting a lot harder. The second tip is learning to get a good book. So a lot of people nowadays don't like to use books. They like to use other resources because they're easier. But I would recommend getting a book because books go into a lot more detail typically than an online source or a YouTube video or something else. And so I would try to get books that you can use and learn a lot of information from. And I'd actually try to go from the beginning of the book through the end of the book. The reason I do this is because the book is laid out in that order for a reason. It makes it easier to learn the material, which is why the author wrote it that way. But the second thing is I actually use my books a lot. So two of the books I use a ton for my work using statistics is the first one is Introductory Econometrics, A Modern Approach. It's the 5th edition. It's by Jeffrey M. Wooldridge. I use this book a lot. It covers a ton of information on statistics, time series. Basically, this is my go-to book for general information, and it gives me kind of a starting point of what I'm looking for. And if I need more details, I can look for those online or in other textbooks. The second book I like to go to is Statistical Analysis of Financial Data in S+. For those of you that know, S+ is more or less dead. R is the substitute. But this has a lot of information that I use for time series analysis. And since I've read this book, I've highlighted it and I've taken notes in the book. And so I actually go back to this and read this quite a bit. So it's a good resource. It's a good tip to have books. The third piece of advice kind of contradicts the second one, but online videos, YouTube series are great ways to learn a specific concept in detail or to look at it from a different perspective. So a lot of times a book or an author or a professor or a friend will explain a concept to you and they understand it from one direction. But you should try to, so if you don't understand it, you should try to come at it from a different direction. And the best way to do that, I feel, is to go online, Google, what you're trying to learn, and then watch a video on it or find an academic article. Or for example, I think I use Stack Overflow, or there's a bunch of websites I use for technical explanations of different concepts. And I find these helpful because everybody has a different take on the same principles. So the fourth takeaway from self-learning is more or less the more you learn, the more you realize you know basically nothing. And I'm not saying this is a demeaning concept, but I remember in high school kind of being a teenager and everything, having an attitude and thinking I knew everything. And then I went to undergrad and I learned a lot in undergrad and thought, I don't really know everything, but I know quite a bit and I've learned a lot in school, but there's definitely all these different venues that I haven't discovered or I haven't taken classes on. And then I went and got a master's degree and I learned even more, and it was even more specialized in one topic. And then I realized I know basically nothing. There's so much out there to learn. And for self-learning, it should be more or less like a spider web, is the way I like to view it. Is typically you have one problem. And so you learn a lot about one problem, and then you realize you need to understand different parts of that problem. So then you take that problem and there's say 3 different routes that you're taking. And so you want to learn about these 3 things. And then once you learn these 3 things, so you understand the original problem better, you realize there's 3 or 4 things off of each one of those 3 things that you didn't know. And so it just keeps going and going, and you can get deeper and deeper and deeper. And so a lot of times it's good to stop yourself and kind of realize you're not going to learn everything. It's not possible. But to realize that you can go really, really deep and learn a ton of information about one topic or one thing. But again, I think the key takeaway here is realizing you don't know as much as you think you know. And so spend a little more time self-learning to help learn more about what you're working in your career, hobbies, your daily life. There's always more to learn. And so the takeaway is the more you learn, you realize the less you actually know in the universe and in the realm of things. So self-learning is definitely an important concept to keep improving yourself and becoming better and better at what you want to do. So the 5th one is definitely something I think is probably the most important item on this list for careers. The fifth one is creating small projects. So a lot of times you're self-learning and like you go through this textbook and you're just reading through all this information and you're like, yeah, I know it. You know, I read all this stuff, therefore I know it. But a lot of times the other problem too is that A, you don't learn it when you're doing that, and B, you superficially cover random topics, but they don't really link together as well as you thought they did. And you don't realize that, and so at the end of the day, you don't learn anything. So the fifth one is creating small projects. So this is big in programming. I would encourage this in any field. Try to create like a small project, whether you're gonna write a paper on something or you're gonna create like a program that does something. Go out there and try to create a small project. The reason small projects are beneficial is A, you can mention it in an interview if you don't have experience. B, it gives you expertise on something. And I think kind of the third thing on this is that you really start understanding the problems, because when you start like a small project, you're gonna think it's really easy. And then you start going and then you realize like you understand one thing, but you can't get it to do, like the project, you need something else done on the project, but you have to learn something else to do that. And so little small projects are great because A, they show employers that you're motivated, they show them that you really like what you do, but also B, it helps you in the learning process to link ideas together, and it helps you to problem solve and encourage more self-learning as you go without making it seem like a chore. So the sixth takeaway about self-learning and why it's important is that you will never become an expert at anything unless you self-learn. I truly believe this. If you're in a job for 20 years and you do the same thing every day, you go in, right, you're learning on the job and that's fine. If you're not self-learning outside of work, you're never really going to be the expert. You're going to be the guy that can just do his job really well, or they can barely do like different jobs, but you're not going to add a lot of value to the company, and most people are never going to consider you an expert. And so becoming an expert in what you do, I think, is very important in life. It's fulfilling, it's an achievement. It's not something that I think you attain. It's more like a process, like self-learning. It's a continual process that goes over and over and over again. But becoming an expert is crucial on self-learning and thinking. So when you read about a problem and you watch a video on a problem and you're trying to understand it, make sure that you focus a lot of your time on actually understanding it and then thinking about it. So even if you like read a book, watch a video or something, you might spend some time either after it thinking about it, like, does that really make sense? Because a lot of times we just accept things like, oh, it makes sense from the surface, and then we leave the problem. But you don't really learn it because you're not thinking about like, oh, well, how does that connect to these other concepts I know? And does that really make sense the way it was taught? And how can I use that in the future? So self-learning is something that will make you an expert over time, because you'll definitely go beyond the average person. And I actually do believe as well that becoming an expert, depending on the level of expertise you want to have, is not very challenging, especially in today's world. The reason I say this is because I believe in normal distributions in general in life. For those of you that don't know the normal distribution, it's a bell curve. Right at the middle, the highest point is 50%. So that's the average in a normal distribution. Mine, I would say, is standard normal, so centered around 0. Anyways, the point being is, to be an expert, it's not really hard to beat the average, because the average person probably goes to do an undergraduate degree or a master's degree and then they stop learning. And so to be smarter than that average person, all you have to do is start self-learning, and I believe that self-learning will push you beyond the average person and make you an expert in that area. And the last takeaway of self-learning is, if you can teach your concepts that you've learned to somebody else, that's when you know that you really understand it. And I feel like a lot of times self-learning is kind of a painful process. I know it's hard to force yourself to sit down with a book and read through it and think about it and try to come up with ideas, which again is why like small projects are helpful. But if you can teach something, you definitely know it. You know it inside and out. You know it better than you thought you knew it before. And I think it's a key indicator that your self-learning is paying off and that you more or less have success in the self-learning realm. So those are my tips and advice about self-learning. Again, it's very, very crucial in life. I think being successful is tied to self-learning. Those that self-learn are those that are successful because they're an expert on something. And as you'll find out, a lot of people push this diversification, like, oh, you need to be diversified. You want to be a generalist. Some people like doing this. And I'm not like, I don't want to bash like, oh, it's bad to be a generalist, or more or less a jack of all trades, which I somewhat consider myself. But the thing is, if you want to be successful at something and be very good at something, you want to make a lot of money in life, you want to be happy, It usually pays off to specialize. It pays off to be very good at one thing because you can add more value to the people around you. You can help more people. And again, you can probably make a lot more money if you're specialized at one thing. Anyways, thanks for watching. And as always, until next time. Thanks for watching my video. If you find it helpful, please like, share, and subscribe.